All right, hello everybody. This is John from the West Virginia Robotics Alliance, and this is our virtual drivers meeting for the VEX Remote Skills Only events that we're running here in the winter and spring of 2021. So some of the topics we're going to cover in this video, we'll talk about what you can do before the event to get ready. We'll talk about some of the technical requirements and kind of what your setup needs to look like on your end. We'll talk about the procedure for running a match and what that's going to look like. And we'll finish up with some tips and recommendations to use your time block as efficiently as possible. So what to do before the event. As in every season, the first thing you should do is get familiar with the game manual. Lots of important rules and information in the game manual, but particularly for remote skills only events, it's a good idea to get familiar with those components of the game manual. So for VRC, that's Appendix B. For VEX IQ Challenge, near the end of the game manual itself. Make sure you're familiar with all the rules and procedures and requirements for remote skills only events. Also want to make sure that you have all the equipment you need to participate in one of these events, and we'll talk about that in some more detail later on. As always, you want to make sure your consent forms are completed in robot events for all your team members. Yes, we do still need consent forms, even for events that are not happening in person. They still cover important information and liability, so you need to make sure you have those filled out. It's a good idea to practice inspecting your robot yourself. You can go on the REC Foundation website and download the inspection checklist. Get familiar with all the requirements, all the things that our referees are going to ask you during the inspection procedure, and make sure you're good to do that. And also a good idea before the event to work on your engineering notebook. So not only the content of your engineering notebook, but also making sure your engineering notebook is in an acceptable format to use and submit to us for remote judging. And of course, you can find all the requirements for remote judging in the judge guide and the judge guide addendum on the REC Foundation website. Then in the week before the event, there'll be some additional things you need to do. So for our events on Saturdays, the Monday morning before the event, we'll send out an email to all the registered teams, and that's going to have links to schedule your time blocks and to submit your engineering notebook and so on, as well as some other important information. There'll probably be a link to this video in that email if you haven't watched it beforehand. So you'll get those links on Monday morning. You'll need to schedule your time blocks for the skills runs and for your interview with the judges. We recommend that you do that as early as possible. Those time blocks are scheduled on a first-come, first-served basis. So if you wait until Wednesday or Thursday to reserve those, the time block you want might not be available. So we would suggest you do that as early as possible. There'll also be a link to submit your engineering notebook. We're asking teams to submit those notebooks by the end of the day on Tuesday before the event. There is a little bit of flexibility in that deadline. But certainly the judges will need some time to review all the engineering notebooks before they interview teams. So Tuesday by the end of the day is our suggestion there. And then the day before the event, we strongly recommend that you come to our drop-in inspection period. So typically for most of our events, that's going to be from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Check the agenda tab on robot events for your specific event to confirm that time. And again, that's a drop-in session. You don't need to be connected for the whole 2 hours. It's only going to take a few minutes for us to inspect your robot and make sure your camera setup is working. But it does make things go a lot smoother on Saturday during your time block, as we'll talk about later. Okay, for some of the technical requirements, there will be some equipment that you need on your end. So of course you need a robot and you need a field to run the robot on. But in addition to that, you also need these things. You need a device that can connect to a Zoom meeting. So Zoom is the meeting platform that we're using for our skills only events. You'll need a camera placement that will allow us to see the whole field. We'll take a look at some examples of that in a moment. You'll need a device to use as a timer, and we'll take a look at that in a moment as well. We also recommend that you have a second device in the Zoom meeting that you can move around with video on to get some close-up shots of the field. That is optional, but we strongly recommend it. It will make things go a lot smoother. And then for the inspection procedure, you'll need something to size your robot with. So for VRC, if you have a sizing tool, awesome. If you don't, measuring tape is fine. For VEX IQ Challenge, again, if you have a VEX IQ Challenge sizing tool, that makes things really easy. If you don't, you can just set your robot down in its starting position and then use a measuring tape to check the height. And if you don't have access to a field at the time you're joining us for inspection, then we can always just use a measuring tape. That's fine as well. Okay, let's take a look at some information about camera placement. So here in this image is an example of a video setup that meets all the requirements for our remote skills only event. So some things to note. Number one, most importantly, there is an unobstructed view of the entire field. I can see every goal. I can see all the starting positions for balls, so I can see the field is reset correctly for the skills challenge. And that's all available in a single shot without needing to move the camera or pan around. It's a single unobstructed view of the entire field. We can also see the timer in shot. I've just got an iPad on a stool in front of the field here. And the display on that timer is large and readable. I can read that text just fine. And our driver is in shot, and so is the controller, or at least the controller would be in shot if I had remembered to bring a controller to the field with me when I took this photo. But we do want to see the driver and controller in shot as well. This is where I had to place the camera to get that video. So here's the field here, and a little under 8 feet back from it and a little under 8 feet up is the camera here in the middle of this red circle. So what this shows, that the camera may need to be fairly far away from the field and fairly high up to get everything in shot. So it's really important that you play around with your setup, your particular camera in your particular room to make sure you know where you need to put the camera to get everything in shot. Here's another example of a camera position that meets all the requirements. So for skills-only events, there's no requirement that the camera be on any particular side of the field. I want to stress that's for skills-only events. For live remote tournaments, there are some requirements there. But for skills-only events, you can put the camera on any side of the field. What I've done here is put the camera actually looking kind of at a corner of the field rather than a side. And that means that the widest part of the field is further away from the camera, so I can place the camera closer and still get everything in shot. One other thing to note here is that I've deliberately stood on the far side of the field from the camera in this driver station. If I were standing in this other driver station on the close side, then I would be obstructing part of the field. You know, if I were standing here, I might be obstructing this goal, and that's no good. So I want to make sure that the drivers aren't standing in between the camera and the field, because that makes it more difficult for us to see. And again, our timer is nice and clearly visible here at the front. This is what the camera setup looked like to get that shot. So the camera is a little bit closer to the corner of the field, about a foot or two closer than it was in the other setup, but it's also much lower down. I didn't have to place it nearly as high up. All I did to get the shot was I just took this box. This is actually the box that half a field's worth of goals come in for VRC changeup, and I put it on a chair and put the camera on that. So there you have lots of options for where you can put the camera to get a good camera position. We can see everything in shot. But again, just want to make sure that you've played around with your equipment, made sure you know where to put the camera before joining the event. In terms of which camera to use, you don't need to go out and buy a special camera for this purpose. Any webcam you have will probably work fine. You can also use your phone. You can join the Zoom meeting from your phone and put that in a position to see the whole thing. We've had teams do that. That's also great. But if you are looking to buy a camera for this purpose, maybe you want to leave it set up permanently or whatever, then one camera I would recommend is this one. It's the Aki PC-LM1E. Two things I like about this camera for this job. One, it's relatively inexpensive. I think it's like $39.99 on Amazon right now. So relatively cheap compared to some other higher end webcams. And it's also got a really wide field of view, which means you can place it closer to the field and still get the whole thing in shot. Okay, that's the camera. Let's talk now about the timer. So for the timer, we need to have a timer visible in the same camera feed as the field without obstructing anything. So the most common way to do this is just to stick a device in the shot in front of or behind the field. As far as which device to choose, the larger screen you can get, the better. So if you have a tablet or a laptop that you can stick in front of the field, that works great. Some teams, their setups are such that they have actually like a television or a computer monitor near the field that's kind of already in shot. If you have one of those, that's awesome too. What we don't necessarily recommend is using a phone as the timer. The screens of most phones are just not big enough to make it easy for us to see that timer from your camera perspective. So if you have to use a phone, you can, but it's not what we recommend. One other thing to note with placing a screen in the view of this webcam, you may have to turn the screen brightness down. Sometimes when it's all the way up, especially on like a phone or a tablet where we'll automatically adjust its brightness, it gets way brighter than everything else in the scene, and the screen is just overexposed and we can't read the text on it. So we may ask you to turn the screen brightness down on your camera so we can read the timer a little bit better. As far as timer software, you can use any timer you want. There are a million timers out there on the internet and as phone apps and so on. But two we want to kind of highlight and recommend specifically. The first is FLL-timer.com. Now this is a timer that we developed for First LEGO League, which is another one of the robotics competitions that we support. But it's also got a mode for working with VEX skills. So just in this gear on the top right, we can change it from FLL to skills. And that just changes it from a 2.5 minute timer to a 1 minute timer. And we can click the start button to start and the reset to reset it. So this is all it is, it's just a timer. But what's good about it, what works well about this timer is that it's got really large text and it's very high contrast. And those two things make it really easy to read the text of this timer when you put it on a screen and then put that screen in a webcam's view from kind of far away. So this is the timer that we would recommend on most devices. If you have a tablet or a laptop or a screen, we'd suggest you use that timer. Again, that's FLL-timer.com. One other timer that we see teams use is the VRC Hub app or the VIQC Hub app on a phone or a tablet. It's got a timer built in. You can also find videos on YouTube that are basically the same timer as a video. Now this timer is okay. It does the job. It's a 1 minute timer. But you notice the text on this timer is a lot smaller than it is on our website here. I could full screen this video on my laptop and the actual text of the timer would still be smaller than if I just pulled up the other timer website on my phone here. So this is not very well suited to reading this text when you place this on a screen and put that screen in the camera view. However, what's nice about this timer is this animated ring. At 1 minute, the ring is all blue, and as the timer runs out, it gets less and less blue until at 0, it's all gray. So if you do need to use a phone as your timer, we would suggest using the VRC Hub or VIQC Hub app, because even if we can't read the text, we will still be able to see this ring moving, and so we can see when you start and stop the timer. So as far as timers to use, we suggest FLLtimer.com on anything except phones. On phones, we suggest this timer either in the Hub app or as a YouTube video. Okay, I want to talk now about the procedure for running a match. So before you can run the match, of course, your field needs to be reset correctly. So the first step will be to reset your field, put everything where it needs to go to start a skills match and get your robot ready and set up in its starting position as well. While you're doing this, also a good idea to make sure your camera view is okay. Make sure you have everything in shot that needs to be in shot. We can see the whole field. We can see your timer. We can see your driver, where they're going to stand, and the controller. make sure all that's good to go. Once everything's ready to go on your end, you'll let us know that you're ready to start the match, and we'll let you know that we're ready for you to start the match. So we both have to be ready on each end, so that we're not surprising each other. There's stuff we have to set up on our end before you can go. So we'll have that quick check, make sure we're both ready. Once everyone's ready, you'll count down 3, 2, 1, go, and on go, someone on your end will start your timer. And from there, you'll play the 1-minute skills match as normal. Once the match ends, there's also a specific procedure. Most important thing is once the match ends, stop driving your robot, set your controller on the ground, do not enter the field or touch anything. Just like at a normal event, right? At a normal in-person event, when the skills run's over, you wouldn't immediately walk onto the field and begin resetting because the referee needs some time to record the score. In this case, we also need some time to record the score. So when the match is over, stop driving, controller on the ground, stay still. We will then begin recording the score. As we're recording the score, we might need to see some part of the field up close. So maybe we want to see the top of a VRC goal to make sure the ball is below it. Maybe we want to see that a riser is flat down on a floor, on the floor in a goal and not resting on the edge of that lip. So we may need to see some parts of the field up close. Ideally, you will have a second device in the meeting with video on that you can move around the field to get that shot. This is not a strict requirement, but it does make things go a lot faster compared to if you have to keep moving your camera from its fixed position, go get a close-up, and then move it back for the next run. That takes a lot of time. So we strongly recommend that you join the field with 2 devices with video on, one to get that stationary view of the field that we're looking at during the match, and a second to get close-ups when we need them while we're scoring. So we'll record the score. Once we've recorded the score, we will give you the all clear to reset your field. Again, I want to emphasize, do not start resetting your field until we have given you that all clear. We will make it very clear to you when we have recorded the score and we're ready for you to reset your field. Please do not reset your field before that. Okay, and we're going to close out the drivers meeting with some tips about time management. Now, at most of our events, we're planning to have 20-minute time blocks for teams to get in their skills runs. For some events, if they don't fill up to capacity and we have the extra time in the day, we'll extend those to 30 minutes, but our plan is 20-minute time slots. Now, we know from the events we've already run with 20-minute time slots, the 20 minutes is enough time to get all 6 of your skills runs in. But it's not a lot more time than you need to do that. So it is important that we manage our time well. So 4 things you can do to make sure you will have enough time in your block to get those runs in. Number 1 is get inspected during our drop-in inspection period on Friday afternoon. Again, that's generally 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Check your agenda tab for the specific time for your event. If you get inspected on Friday, then you don't have to do it during your 20-minute block, so you have more time in that block for skills runs. Number 2 is to figure out your camera setup and all the other technical aspects beforehand, ideally a couple of days before the event even, so you have time to work out any kinks that come up. If you join the event and we have to spend the first couple of minutes making sure your camera is positioned correctly and we can see your timer and so on, that takes a little bit of time away from running your skills runs. Another thing we would recommend is to connect to our Zoom meeting a few minutes before the start of your time block, 5 or 10 minutes before the start of your block. This will give you time to work out any technical issues that come up with the meeting. So if you have maybe a little bit of trouble connecting to audio in Zoom, you can disconnect and reconnect. You've got plenty of time for that. Also, if you can't make it to inspection on Friday afternoon and you need to get inspected during your block on Saturday, if you join a couple minutes early and the previous team finishes a couple minutes early, we can let you in and get that inspection started a couple minutes before your block starts, so you have more time. So those are all great tips, but the most important thing, the biggest way to save time and make sure you have time for all your runs is to have a second camera in the meeting with you that you can move around independent of your fixed camera. This will drastically reduce the time that it takes for us to score the matches and that means that you can get started with your next match much more quickly. So we really strongly recommend joining the meeting with 2 cameras, one stationary, one that you can move around. Okay, that's going to do it for our drivers meeting. If you have any questions about anything we've covered here or anything else about our events, you can always contact us. Our contact information is on the robot events page for all of our events. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And we look forward to seeing you at one or more of our remote skills only events this season.